Oh, hello. Greetings, cultists, mighty wizards, sworn swords, muscle warriors. In today's video, we're doing an entire process on the Necron Warden. I don't know what he's called. Everything's got new names, but it's all a killing robot to me. It doesn't make a difference what it's called. The only thing that matters is the sound it makes when it kills a man. So, without further ado, let's get into the video. I've customized him a little bit, just added some jeweler's chain and a few skulls from the Citadel box of skulls. Built up the base with a piece of corkboard and then some slate that I smashed up. Sprinkled a little skull in there. The ground turned white because I sprayed Stino Res on this while some of the glue was still wet, so we had kind of a chemical reaction, but we're going to paint over those chemical reactions. So in this first step, I'm just going to show you how I would start a model off. Jump through the base coat. Necrons are most of the time always silver. In our little world, they will be full silver. So I'm just going to kick off the main body by wet blending Vallejo Gunmetal Gray, just the darkest silver that I have available. I'll just wet blend that with some Vallejo Black, and I just want to make sure that the upward facing angles are the brightest, and I want to be very dramatic as well, so if there isn't a strong enough shadow catching on a particular area, I can always go and add some more black paint, some more of that ingredient that's missing. And I could start this off with an airbrush. The airbrush is a useful tool. Not everyone has one, so today we'll be just using the hand brush. But as an alternative, you could grab the airbrush, base coat this model with silver, spray upwards with the black, catching all the shadows, filtering everything. Yeah, you've got some options. But today we'll just do it all by hand. I don't want you to lean too heavily on any one technique. You want to, look at all the techniques available and just basically choose what's best for the job, but also what's the most fun. And we're looking at everything as a much more general shape. I'm not paying attention to every single detail on his face. I'm just looking at the whole head as just kind of a cylinder, making sure that the upper area is bright, the lower area is dark. I can always go and color correct, and that's how I'm looking at every piece of this model. I'm just kind of breaking it into basic geometric shapes. I'm looking at this leg as a cylinder basically, and since the side of his calf muscle here is the most outward and upward facing angle, I make sure that that's the brightest. All of this black paint that I'm sweeping in as a shadow will have a little bit of silver mixed into it, so it still maintains that metallic flake. It is all good, and I'll be dropping a wash on it later just to further kind of deaden the areas that I don't want to be shiny, line and define. I've barely cleaned my brush out either. It's still carrying a lot of silver and a lot of black, but the two colors don't really clash with each other too much. I'd be a little more cautious if I was dropping white on top of any other color. Eventually the end of your brush will just become a mixture of those two. But silver and black gives me a little more leeway. And yes, painting the interior of the model a little more difficult when you glue the gun across the chest, but I also wanted to go a little quicker on this model, and maybe if you can't see it, then it doesn't need to be painted. That's what I'll tell myself. If this was a competition piece, you know, something a little more intense, then I would definitely go the longer route, but as assembly would allow it, I had to glue the arm pegs underneath this chest piece. It went on there, it just held everything in place, so I just kind of chose the easier slash lazy route. But I believe my brush can reach all the areas of importance. And yeah, we'll make the tip of his weapon silver as well. And you know, I see this this bayonet is at a slight angle. As I see it, more light would be gathering down at this lower side as the weapon's kind of pointed downward, and the light would flow along the blade and kind of graduate at that point. We'll do a little equal and opposite on the bottom blade. There's a certain amount of light that's going to bounce up off of the ground, so we want that. I want to capture that in our reflections. I'll give these blades the same treatment. A little further along in the process, he's base coated and things are blended up. While I have the silver out, I want to pick out some more prominent areas, maybe some things that I may have missed in my kind of broad sweep. You know, picking out the lower teeth here. There's some angles on the elbows. You know, this little flat area that's exposed. So to make sure that we're catching some of these smaller details at this point. Throw a quick edge highlight on some more dominant areas. Prominent, dominant. Who knows? And yeah, just a little bit of blending on top of some of these gradients, just to make sure everything's coming up just right. Not bad. So he's going to have some golden areas as well. Mainly the little Necron hieroglyphics running along his collar. I'm using P3's Orgoth bronze for this tone. It's a nice kind of a deadened gold color. And I'll sweep just a little bit of black in at the bottom here. Let's see, where else can we add this gold to make things more interesting? Maybe this little globe on his gun. I think we'll make all the little dots inside of here. I'll make those bronze as well, but I want to cover that in an opaque color first. So we'll take care of that. So I'll take this neutral gray from Monument. I'll throw just a touch of blue in there. Decent. You know, it's better if I just take black and blue. I've just got a deeper start as I'm going to wet blend these progressions on. I think it'll just be easier this way. So cover this area in a black blue. Get this every little tendril of his robot cape. I'll take just a small amount of white. I didn't clean my brush out either, so I still have some of that paint left in my brush. Kind of, you know, on the upper end of each of these little groupings, kind of broken into threes at this angle. notice I'm using less and less paint as I go down because I want this upper area to be just a little bit brighter. I want to lead the eye upwards, and he's closer to our light source, assuming that it's the standard overhead. We'll assume that he's walked underneath some kind of futuristic street lamp, and he's just perfectly illuminated from the top down, and there's no possible other light source coming from any other direction. Yeah. I'll have to reapply paint here just because I need it to be wet so I can work it. Control that angle. Just notice the amount of paint that I'm using. You can see it here on my brush. Very, very small amount. Maintaining surface contact. And when I start to mix it in and run out of paint, then I'll just grab a little bit more, and I just keep balancing out the ingredients until I'm happy. For example, I went very slow there, adding very, very small gradual amounts, just so you could see it build up. I think I'm good, actually. We'll give this one a little bit of a tap, and further highlighting will be done with a little bit of edge highlighting and such, smaller brush. But yeah, first we'll take these general passes. It's not perfect, but it's definitely a quick start, and I can work a lot in from there. Take care of his shoulders next. So as it kind of flares outwards here, it would be catching a lot less light. You can see the light falling down naturally on top of the shoulder right here. I can use that as my guide. Sometimes if I'm a little confused, I'll hold the model up underneath a lamp, give me an idea of that naturally falling light source. Just wet blend it in just like so. Do the same on that upward facing ridge. Looks like we can color this one in as well. And a little light would kind of creep around the edge, fall into the lower part. Alright, we'll hit the other side. Ordinarily, I like to start things off with a zenithal base coat, meaning I would spray the model black and then white from above. But since this model, overall, I wanted to turn out having a very dark look, and because it's mainly metallic tones, those work better on top of a black base coat. So we'll just help along the most dominant or most abundant color. And I'll just keep playing with that wet blend, make it just a little bit brighter. I can quickly layer some on the other side with that same brush load, and touch more white. Let's acknowledge this little ridge there a bit. You can see there's kind of a separation again as the light's naturally falling on it. I see a heavier shadow on this flat facing versus this facing that I'm painting up right now. So just a very subtle amount. Decent. I want the casing of his gun to be the same black, blue, gray tones. Whenever I'm painting the color black, I usually add just a subtle amount of something else, be it brown, red, blue, just a little something to push it in a certain direction. you know, if I'm going to be acknowledging color theory, I want to add some rust to this model later. Some, you know, to be a much warmer tone in the form of some kind of orange and terracottas. So basically the warm red spectrum, complementing that with a subtle amount of a cold tone worked into the black. Should have a nice harmony going on there. I think we'll do all the hoses in a green tone. Just to break things up back here, I'll do these two smaller hoses in the same gray blue kind of progression. So right here where the most light would be gathering, where it's bowed out, just make sure everything's accumulating up to that fine little point. And we'll get this bend right here. Can always bounce back to my base color if I feel like that's too much. Alrighty, not bad. Let's base coat those skulls. I use P3's Thornwood Green. I use a pretty thin amount. You know, being over a black base coat, if I just lay down one layer of this, it'll dry. It's kind of a darker take. And while that's all wet, of course, I'm going to wet blend. Grab a little bit of this Gun Corpse Brown. It's a nice neutral tan. Just very generally, you know, throw it on the top of the skulls, kind of get across the brows, cheekbones. Maybe I'll kind of dabble it on there. Stipple, dabble, interchangeable terms. Decent. And again, the skulls give me a chance to kind of spice things up. You know, we've got very neutral drab colors going on. So that'll be a nice touch. Just a spot of color and another thing I can use to kind of work my any theories I may have about how this is coming together. Let's take some bright Necrotech green. If I add black to that, that'll be a nice base coat for these tubes. And a little brighter yet. Of course, I'll correct everything with some layering later on, but why not just get a good foundation set up? And yeah, even though in the future these little baubles may be compromised, I'll still just throw a base coat down. This is a way I can check my composition. It's just easier on the eyes as well. I prefer to see the model in a more colored version, but this gives me a chance to kind of check things. Maybe I don't like the green being there. Maybe I want to change those that color to just being bronze or something. This is a way of eyeing things up before I fully dedicate myself to a paint job. Now, since I have a dark model overall, I want to give him a very bright base color. It'll just make everything kind of jump out a little bit more. I should attend to the gun just a little bit here. I'll give it kind of a quick wet blend. Alright, we'll grab a little bit of this terracotta tone. What do we got? Burnt orange from Monument. Lay this down in the more dirty areas, because I want it to be black stones and red sand. Just lay on, especially on a base, you can lay down very heavy amounts. No big deal. And yeah, just make sure that these rocks are dark, that they're a darker mixture of the burnt orange and black. Not bad. Definitely not finished, but not bad. Alright, let's give this base just a moment to settle and dry, and then we can start refining things. Here he is with the old base coat. Not too bad. I'm going to go in there and get a little finer with some black shading, mainly on the silver bits and the black and blue bits. So let's grab a little bit of water and just control where the shine is happening on some of these areas. I want to deepen the temple here and just kind of add to a lot of these dimensions. Let's go add a little shadow pass. But yeah, I'm just going now and with this black, just reinforcing the shading that I created with the wet blending. Just pulling that scope of focus in a little bit closer. Not too shabby. So I'll go in and give the shoulders the same treatment. It's just a few thin layers to smooth everything out. Refining what I did with that wet blend. And I can drop some edge highlights down as well. I'll probably attend to that later with a finer brush. Alright. Get a finer brush. Jump in here. Not too shabby. Now it's time for a little black and brown ink wash here. I'll add a touch of black paint to that as well. Make sure that I add plenty of water to that. Just sweep this down into all the crevices. Just want to keep it from pooling up on the top of any of these highlighted areas that I have set up, any of these brighter upward facings. And this will just help reinforce all the shading, kind of line out these details, cling to the shadows that I already laid in there. But yeah, I want to kind of going a little heavy on this. I want to make the model very dark. I want a very deep, dark, sinister look to him. And we'll take that same wash and see what happens if I carry it across all this black blue as well. I mean, even though there's some brown in there, it should harmonize nicely. I just want to make sure there aren't any weird puddles or pools popping up, so I'll take the brush and kind of soak some things up. Make sure it's all staying where I want it, you know, double check that I didn't miss any areas. I'll throw it on the skulls as well. Deep, dark, grim, sinister, stylish. Let's throw a touch on the base as well. I'll thin this down considerably. I'll pretty much place some on the base and then grab water from my cup to spread it out. Been pretty obsessed with the weathering powder lately, so I'll probably throw some weathering powder on this guy, which will brighten everything up a good amount. We'll let that dry and have a look at our guy. Alright, now that wash was dried, it was time for some refinement. We'll go in there with my little gray, blue, and white mixture. Freshen that up a little bit. And just start laying some edge highlighting down. Here and there, and then we've got little chips and pieces of battle damage added into the sculpt, so I'll pick those out, pressing very lightly. So also during this phase, as I'm adding the highlights in, I want to make sure making these nice and bright. And we'll continue to brighten that up, adding a little bit of white to our green and yellow mixture. Make this tube look a little more interesting, give it kind of a shiny gloss look. Just put some dots, very upward facing angle. Let's brighten that up. Casing on his gun, we'll brighten that up a little bit, but make sure to still be working a gradient. Might as well edge this out. I'm going to pull a light source off of this so it looks like this area of the gun is glowing, but I can edge highlight around it just to add a brighter foundation. Decent. And I also want to take the painstaking step of highlighting every single one of these little coffin shaped capey bits. The important thing here is not to count them and think about the numbers. Just do. Alright, there he is, all lined up, looking pretty nice. Let's finish off the gun. I'll take a little bit of that white, yellow, green mixture. Start edging out around these glowing nodes. Let's get a little green ink from P3 involved. Let's take a very, very thin amount. Ever so slightly now. Add very thin layers to all these green areas. You want it to be transparent enough so everything is showing through, but it's going to help to just tie those tones together, add to the subtlety, line and define in some of those crevices. And while we're doing that, I'm kind of seeing the option here. I want to drop a little bit of a glow on this supporting rod. And once that is all dry, the final highlights on the gun will just be some tiny dots and slashes of pure white. Very, very small amounts. Then once that ink is dry, I want to pull out that glowing dot in the center. Just pick that back up and pull the edge highlighting back up. Do a little more slightly than last time though, concentrating on some of these edges and intersections. So after the gun dried, I wanted that green glow to spread out a little bit further. So I took some of that base coat of that gray blue, I mixed some of that necrotite green into it, and then brought it onto these surrounding areas, just laying it down very, very thin. Get that real subtle glow effect. It's going to take a couple layers before it really catches on. One more healthy pass. Again, I want it to be subtle, so this doesn't have to be the brightest bit. And then wherever it's needed, since I just filtered everything down, I'll have to pop some of it back up. Next thing to take care of is the skulls. I'll take a little Vallejo buff, touch of Gun Corpse brown, and just start picking out some of the details. I don't have to worry so much about blending here because it's in such a small area. As long as I just place things precisely, leave some of that base coat showing so I get a nice craggy, roughed up look, and I'll be in business. Very tight gradients, just so I can maintain that real grim dark look to everything. And we'll grab a little bit of white, if I can get to it. We'll add that to the ivory. And just make sure to not completely cover the previous layers. Alright, let's give the rest of the skulls the same treatment. 3 skulls, staring maniacally. Let's take a little bit of that black and brown ink wash we had mixed up, and just add the smallest filter. I want this to fall into the finest lines, pick out the crevices of each individual tooth, every bullet hole, every crack in these skulls. These skulls tell a story. A life has been lived, and a life has ended at the hands of the Necrons, and now they're nothing but the Christmas lights of the 41st millennium in a darkened hellscape of robots' holiday. So I have a good foundation going now. Everything is built up, but I want the silver to look corroded. So before I add the final highlight to that, I want to lay some rusty tones, some very streaky takes. So we'll thin this down considerably and just start dropping into the crevices. And this is kind of, effectively, this is our little spot color. This will be a little touch of color psychology that'll accent that blue, that subtle bit of blue that's worked into everything. Make sure these rusty chains are just that. Very subtle dabs, work in small amounts. You can see I'm just filtering over this metallic, letting gravity do the work for me, sinking into the crevices. Hopefully it'll hold some of those chains in place as they dry. There are also some of those brass or golden areas. I'll take a touch of turquoise, just make it appear oxidized. Just a very, very subtle amount. Don't go too crazy with this, you know, let it dry, filter down a bit. Now we'll add a slight amount of orange to that mixture and reapply, but in even smaller portions this time. You know, just at some of these heavier crevices. Once all the weathering was complete on the metallics, I wanted to do two things. Add a little bit of gold highlight to all of the brassy areas, just a little touch. I also want to add a final silver highlight to all these brighter upward facing metallic angles. But yeah, I just want to put a little more gold in here so it's just stuck out a little bit more. You know, it got kind of faded into the background, a little bit drab, and this is one of the few distinguishing features on this model, so I want to make sure that I give it a good amount of attention. Now I'll grab a little bit of silver from Vallejo and just start adding some very rickety, rough final highlights, very, very small, slight amounts. Every upward facing angle I'll kind of blend or dot these highlights in place. Try to get these chains to hang vertically. Yeah, it's got a lot of interesting scratches and battle damage. Be sure to give every bit of that a good amount of attention. I want to make sure that, you know, this is when all the details come out, make the model look interesting. A little bit of a blend up here and here, but mainly just those tiny dots and slashes, some very fine amounts of an edge highlight. Alrighty, not bad at all. That's all set up, so let's just put a little dry brush trace on the base. Bring these rocks up a little bit, just with a medium gray with a touch of the bloodstone mixed into it. And we'll make that a little bit brighter on those upward facings. And then I'll take a touch of ivory, and a bit of that burnt orange. Just very lightly brush that over some of the areas with more soil. Alright, not too bad. We'll get a little bit of rust orange. Very, very trace amount, but we'll get a thin wash and just kind of dip it into some of the crevices just to add a more realistic look to our soil. I'll throw some around his feet too, because he's been kicking up dust. Okay, looks like a mess, but we'll have to let that dry. Oh yes, and you've made it. There he is in all of his splendiferous glory, trusty, rusty, anti-human. Thank you for sitting through this video. I know it was a little bit longer. What could have been broken into a few videos, I wanted to try to put it all into one, just to make the projects keep moving on this Patreon. It was about 3.5 to 4 hours painting the model. I recorded a little over an hour of footage and was able to splice it down into about 30 minutes. Please let me know what you thought in the comments. I really appreciate all the constructive feedback and positivity going on in this Patreon. So I tip my non-existent hat to you and pass along a big thanks. I'll be making videos from the new location very soon, but we'll see that when it comes. I don't know how to end this video, so have a good day.